when I was preparing for this talk, I told myself, okay, this is an important talk. I must do my homework. So I watched all the videos of TEDxDanubia, and I did not see anybody that looks like me. So probably by now, you already have a feeling what I will be talking about. But please, I will be talking about China. But please don't leave your seats, because I will not give you a long and boring speech about the rise of China or the importance of the emerging economies. But rather, I would like to share with you a unique situation that China is facing today, which might impact all of us. So as you know, today, China is the second largest economy in the world, and it is projected to become the largest economy in the world in 10 years, 20 years, or 5 years, depends on who do you ask. I mean, these terms, largest, second largest, sounds a bit too abstract. Okay, so concretely what that means, I can share with you my personal experience. I think you can all relate to. I was born in a city named Qingdao in northern China. It's a small city with only 3 million people. And when I was 18, I left my hometown to study in Shanghai. You know, at that time, I felt like a poor peasant trying to escape the countryside. Okay, I'm gone. I'm done with this place. I'm going to have a better life in Shanghai. I'm never coming back. So actually, people around me recently have been telling me, Paul, don't have that stereotype. You know, China has changed. Why don't you take a second look, have a second thought? I said, okay, I mean, if it doesn't cost me anything to Google it, why don't I look for some information about my hometown? So I realized that today, Qingdao has a total population of 8.5 million, and its GDP last year was 117 billion US dollars. In comparison, Hungary has a total population of 10 million, and its GDP last year was 127 billion US dollars. So in fact, that city I tried so hard to escape now has the same economic size as the country I'm living in. And not only that, the story doesn't end there. If I'm not mistaken, the economy in Hungary is not growing, maybe even shrinking slightly, while my hometown enjoys an annual growth of 12 to 14% each year. That means in 5-6 years' time, that poor countryside I fled would have twice as big as the economy as Hungary, as a whole country. I mean, this is just one small city in China. So of course, you can imagine that the Chinese people are very excited, you know, as anybody would be very excited. However, to fully understand the excitement of Chinese people, it's important that we put it into the context of the entire Chinese history. So what do I mean by that? As many of you may already know that, in fact, China was ahead of the rest of the world for much of the human history. Many great inventions came from China, such as gunpowder, rocket, paper, printing, and probably most importantly, the toilet paper. However, in the 17th century, China started to decline after it was conquered by a nomadic tribe from the north, the Manchus. So all the technology and innovation advancement in China stopped. After 2 centuries of Manchu rule, China had reached the lowest point of its history and fell significantly behind the West. So how did the Europeans react at that time? They said, okay, let's go to China and exploit the weakness of their country. Let's send our gunboats. So unsurprisingly, the bows and arrows on horseback were no match for the big guns of the Royal Navy. Consequently, China lost its autonomy and was divided into sphere of influence by the major Western powers. So this is a very humiliating experience for Chinese. You know, this fall from the top of the world to the bottom of the world. And I am a professor in CEU Business School, and I live in Hungary for the past 4 years. I know that if the Mongols and Turks would hold their regular session in the Hungarian parliament, how would you feel? I know how would you feel. So, this is what I meant by my earlier comments, that to understand the excitement of the Chinese people, you have to put it into the context of the entire history. So this rapid fall from the top of the world to the bottom of the world made Chinese people very desperate to go back to the top position it once had. So now, after 3 decades of rapid economic growth, it seems that China has a real chance to go back to the top spot it once had. So this is why you can see that this experience with the West actually doubled or tripled the China's excitement to go back to the top of the world. So there is indeed a lot of excitement. However, I can tell you that in China, apart from excitement, there is also a great deal of anxiety. Why? What might go horribly wrong for China? Again, we can find the answer in the history of China. So actually, contrary to many people's common belief, the economic growth China had in the past 3 decades is not the only period when China experienced rapid economic growth. As early as 1928, China had already entered a period of rapid economic growth. So the GDP was growing at 15% each year. The production of all major goods were skyrocketing. But unfortunately, the situation did not last very long. In 1937, all the progress stopped. What happened? China and Japan entered a very bloody conflict, which cost the lives of many, many people. So in the beginning of the conflict, Japan, with a very powerful military, conquered almost the entire coastal area of China and cut off China from the international trade. So at that time, China lost almost 2/3 of its total economy and almost 100% of its weapon supplies. So this situation made the Chinese resistance extremely difficult, because how can you fight a war if you cannot even feed your soldier and give them bullets? So the subsequent 8 years, the loss in human life and property in China was just incalculable, and probably delayed China's migration toward a modern society by several decades. So this tragic episode, well, probably the darkest episode in Chinese history, demonstrated the 2 key vulnerabilities of China, no matter how big the country may seem to be. First is the economy is too much concentrated on the coastal area. Second is it is too dependent on international trade. That means when there is a powerful enemy with a powerful navy coming from the ocean, attack the coastal area, cut off China from the international trade, China will be in really, really, really big trouble. I know somebody in the audience may say, oh, Paul, please, today the world is very different from 1937, and China is not the country it was in 1937. I completely agree with you. However, if you really look into the details, you will see that the key vulnerabilities, or the Achilles heel of China, have not really changed. In the past 3 decades, is mostly the coastal area that benefited from the economic growth. So almost 2/3 of the Chinese economy is concentrated on the coastal area, just as it was 70 years ago, with all the most advanced manufacturing located there. And also China is still very dependent on international trade for its survival. And some of this trade would have to go through dangerous places. For example, almost all China's oil import from the Middle East would have to go through the Malacca Strait next to Singapore. And all the export to Europe and import from Europe would have to travel through the Suez Canal. So if you look at China, despite the fact that China has the largest army in the world, its navy has very limited capability to project its power into these regions. That means a nation as small as Singapore or Israel could potentially disrupt China's development and choke its economy. I'm not saying they would, but they could. Not to mention the mighty navy of the most powerful nations on Earth, which has constructed the so-called island chains to block China's entry into the blue ocean. So this is what I meant by my earlier comment, a unique situation China is facing. So it's a condition with hypertension. On one hand, you have this extreme excitement. After the fall from the top of the world to the bottom of the world, now we have a chance to go back again. It's very exciting. But on the other hand, there is also a great deal of anxiety. Okay, we have no big ships, so what if something goes wrong in Malacca Strait, in Suez Canal, in South China Sea? Who is going to protect our core interest? So if you are the Chinese leaders, okay, you have so much money, okay, how would you solve the dilemma? How would you solve the dilemma? There aren't that many options on the table, actually. Well, you could either build a powerful navy to challenge the US, but this is going to take half a century and $500 billion. It's probably not such a good idea. So if you look at the planet Earth, okay, it's either land or ocean. So if we cannot go through the ocean, so let's try the other option. So actually, the idea of land-based trade is not new. Its origin can be dated back thousands of years when the porcelain and the silk from China traveled westward in exchange for precious metal and spice from the West. So this is actually how it got its name, the Silk Road. Later, this ancient Silk Road was abandoned for two reasons. First is there's this rising military conflict in this region. Second is that the Europeans by that time have figured out a very effective way of global trade by sea. So we don't need that Silk Road anymore. So prior to the year 1990, the land-based trade between Europe and Asia was not possible for a very simple reason. What happened in 1990? So prior to 1990, actually China was at a Cold War with the Soviet Union. And along the border, it was full of Russian tanks. So there was no way China could ship its goods to Europe through the Soviet territory. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, again, it became possible for China to ship its goods by land to Europe. So China took advantage of this favorable condition and has been building the so-called New Silk Road. So let me be very clear that the New Silk Road is not a point-to-point connection between a Chinese city and a European city, but rather it is a vast network of highway, railway, and energy pipelines that connect parts of Asia with parts of Europe, which includes Hungary, actually. So part of this New Silk Road has already been completed, and part of it is being updated, and part of it is still a concept. So let's take a closer look at the New Silk Road with a concrete example. So one small piece of this big picture is the connection between Chongqing and Germany. So as you know, Germany is the biggest economy in Europe, and Chongqing is the biggest city in China with 32 million people and produces 100 million laptops each year. So let me be clear, this is not a future project. It was put into operation in September 2012, so it has been in operation for 8 months. So when this project started, it took approximately 2 weeks from Chongqing to Germany, and there are 2 trains each week. So today, China has been trying to speed up the transportation, increase both the frequency and the speed. So let me be very clear that the new Silk Road is not designed to replace the global sea trade, but it does provide a very useful alternative for China, for safer energy, for example. So on the surface, we can see that the new Silk Road has 2 very obvious benefits. Okay, first is that it cuts the travel time and the travel distance by half. So this really gives the possibility to trade certain goods with a limited shelf life. For example, the fashion goods, laptops, Hungarian cheese. So now it's possible to travel between Germany and Chongqing. The second very obvious benefit is that it allows the interior part of usual Asia to develop, so along the new Silk Road. For example, Central and Western China, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and maybe Hungary. So I think for people that are really interested in China or the global trade, this is a very exciting development, and it's really happening. So for those of you who are not interested in China at all, I claim this is still relevant for you. Why? Because if you think about, I'm here living in Hungary, and we all speak English here. You are Hungarian, I'm Chinese French, we are all speaking English here. So why was that? So if you look at the origin of this phenomena, is in fact the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, when the Royal Navy defeated the French and the Spanish Navy and established the dominance of the Anglo Saxon sea power. So this dominance actually has such a profound impact on the language we speak, the money we use, the films we watch, the food and drink we consume. It's not very healthy, but we do anyways. So this is, so when you think about it, it's really amazing that a single naval engagement could have such a profound impact on people's daily life, even though you may not realize that was the case. Okay, now we are 13 years into the 21st century. So could this all change? So could the world order change? And could the new world order emerge? So what we see today is the rising economies on the usual Asian continent, such as China, India, Russia, to just name a few. And also, with this new Silk Road, more and more global trade would occur by land. So this actually reduces the relative importance of the Anglo-Saxon dominance on the sea, which had such a profound impact on our daily life. So with this new Silk Road, how things may change, I think is a question worth thinking. Okay, I would like to conclude my talk by sharing with you my personal fantasy. October 21st, year 2105, will be the 300th anniversary of the Battle of Trafalgar, and I assume there will be a big celebration in London. My dream is I want to live that long to attend this ceremony, to see that how the world might have changed in the next 95 years, and whether this new Silk Road would indeed have the conjectured effects, or is just my personal fantasy. Thank you.